We've been through these acts and things that Parliament's done that's kind of separated us from British rule. We've been upset in a way and those types of things. And now, you know, that was kind of some things that set the stage for a struggle for independence. So we're trying to make up our mind in the colonies whether we're going to declare independence and fight for that independence or not. Now keep in mind, I want to mention before we start, there are a lot of loyalists in the colonies. And loyalists are those people that are still loyal to the crown. They're not quite as radical as the Sons of Liberty and some of those types of people. So that's got to be balanced as well. But anyway, the overall topic is struggle for independence, and I'm going to talk to you about a few things before we get on to the subtopic of On to Concord. So we've got a couple pages of notes to kind of set the stage. Now, there was a fellow at this time by the name of John Howe. And John Howe was a private in the British Army. And he was actually in America serving as a spy for the British government. So at this time, there was a fellow by the name of John Howe. He was a private in the British Army, and he was in America serving as a spy. And he was stationed in Boston, and he fit in so well, and he did such a nice job of being a spy, so to speak, that the colonists just considered him one of their own. They had no idea that he was in the British Army. They had no idea that he was serving as a spy and reporting their actions back to the British government. Now, the one that used him more than anybody was, remember British General Thomas Gage? He's the one that's really used him. He's the new governor of Massachusetts after this, the Townsend Acts and the Boston Tea Party and all that business. The Intolerable Acts were put in, and that was part of the Intolerable Acts, was to make him the governor. Well, General Gage had heard rumors that these New Englanders, these people in New England, these colonists in New England, were collecting arms and ammunition. And he saw that as dangerous. Okay? So General Gage had heard rumors that colonists in New England were collecting arms, which was the same as weapons, and ammunition. And so what he did is he brought Howe in, John Howe, and he sent him to the surrounding countryside around New England to see if this rumor was true. So he was basically in New England kind of snooping around to see if it was true that the colonists in that area were gathering up, collecting arms and ammunition. Well, when Howe made his trips around New England, he did indeed find out that the colonists were doing that. He discovered where the powder and the rifles were being stored, where the ammunition was being stored. Found all that out. Found out that that rumor was true. And soon realized that the Yankees were ready to fight. And the Yankees was another word for the colonists. Okay? So, Howe discovered where powder and rifles were being stored, where ammunition was being stored. And he realized that the colonists, or Yankees as they were referred to at times, were ready to fight. Now, if he had any doubts about whether they were ready to fight or not, he visited a farmhouse near Lexington. He visited a farmhouse near Lexington. And there was an elderly gentleman at that farmhouse cleaning his gun, which would not be an uncommon sight at that time. So Howe visits a farmhouse near Lexington, and he stopped to talk to an elderly gentleman who was sitting on the porch cleaning his gun. And so Howe kind of strikes up a conversation with him, and he says, "What are you intending to shoot with that gun?" Expecting to get the answer of squirrels or rabbits or deer. And the man says, quote, "A flock of redcoats at Boston." That was his response. He was aiming to shoot, quote, "a flock of redcoats at Boston." Well, as he went from farmhouse to farmhouse to talk to people, he's hearing the same type of stories everywhere he went. And he's all of a sudden seeing colonists turn into rebelling colonists. who at this time will be better known as patriots. Patriots. So patriots are rebelling colonists. What did the British call them? They didn't call them patriots. What did they call them? Rebellious rebels. Okay? So the British referred to them as rebels. They referred to themselves as patriots. And these were rebellious colonists. And Howe's hearing this and seeing this everywhere he goes in New England, and he's finding out that the rumors that General Gage are hearing are absolutely true. Okay? Here's what else he witnessed. 3 other things he witnessed. He witnessed lists that were being posted. And they had names on them. What do you think they had names of? He went around and saw these lists that were tacked on posts and trees and such that had a list of names. What do you think those names were? What? Well, maybe you could monitor him this. Who are the people on that list? Whose names are on the list? What? Loyalists. Very good. Names of loyalists. So, in addition to everything else, Howe witnessed lists that were being posted that were bearing the names of people who remained loyal to the king or loyalists. He was also hearing of the tarring and feathering of loyalists. He was also hearing about that. The tarring and feathering of loyalists. And we've talked about that before. Okay? He also heard rumors that homes of loyalists were being burned by patriots or rebels, however you look at them, in response to the loyalists being loyal to the king. So these people that were declaring themselves loyalists were being harassed, terrorized, whatever you want to say, by these patriots and or rebels, however you look at it. Well, Howe gathers up all this information. He goes back to Boston and reports to who? General Gage. And he says, man, this is really going on. They're gathering up powder, rifles, ammunition. Everybody's got in their mind that they're going to start shooting redcoats. The rebels, who are calling themselves patriots, are tar and feathering loyalists. They're putting names up and persecuting loyalists. We've got a big problem here, General Gage. And it was at this point when General Gage decided he had to teach the colonists a lesson. General Gage made the point to Howe that, well, we need to teach them a lesson. Well, Gage decided to surprise the colonists because they don't know that he knows that they're stockpiling ammunition, powder, and rifles. Okay, they don't know he knows that. And Gage decides that he's going to surprise the colonists because these colonial supplies of ammunition and weapons are at Concord. Concord. And he heard rumor that they were stockpiling weapons around not only Concord, but Lexington as well. 2 towns in Massachusetts. So General Gage decides to surprise the colonists and seize colonial supplies of ammunition and weapons at Concord, where the Patriots had been stockpiling those. And he also had heard about weapons that the Massachusetts militia was stockpiling around both Lexington and Concord. We don't have a Continental Army yet, do we? No, we have militia. Okay, every colony has their own militia. They're not a unified force. Now, not only was General Gage going to capture those ammunitions and supplies, but he wanted to kidnap or capture 2 colonists that were kind of leading this charge. One we've talked about was Samuel Adams, and the other one was a guy by the name of John Hancock. These were 2 important leaders in the colonial legislature that Gage wanted to get his hands on. He wanted both those guys to be captured and arrested for treason, because they were the ones that he felt were stockpiling these weapons and starting this charge. And both men, according to his information, were hiding in Lexington. And it was Gage's mission to find them and arrest them. So everybody following me pretty good here so far? I'll repeat that. It was also the general's intention to capture both Samuel Adams and John Hancock, 2 important leaders in the colonial legislature. Supposedly both men were hiding in Lexington, and it was Gage's mission to find and arrest them. So on April 18th, 1775, on April 18th, 1775, under the cover of darkness, 700 British troops left their quarters in Boston, marching toward first Lexington, then Concord. So on April 18th, 1775, under the cover of darkness, 700 British troops left their quarters in Boston and marched first to Lexington and then to Concord. That was their plan. April 18th, 1775, under the cover of darkness, 700 British troops left their quarters in Boston, marching toward first Lexington, then Concord. Okay? That will then take us to our first subtopic on this, which is on to Concord. But what's in the way of Concord? What are they going to get first? Where are they going to get Lexington? Okay. Well, the British went on their march. We told you that under the cover of darkness, 700 of them on April 18, 1775. And as they were marching, they marched through the town of Menatomi. They marched through the town of Menatomi. So as they're marching to Lexington, then Concord, the British troops marched through the town of Menatomi. And as they were marching through the town of Menatomi, they went right past the house of a retired soldier, 78-year-old Samuel Whittemore. Okay, so as they're marching through the town of Menatomi, they march right past the home of retired soldier, 78-year-old Samuel Whittemore. Now, very good question. He had served 5 decades as a soldier in the King's Army. He served 5 decades in the King's Army as a soldier. Fought in many colonial wars, including the French and Indian War, the recent French and Indian War. So Whittemore had served 5 decades as a soldier in the King's Army. He fought in several colonial wars. And basically what has he chosen to do rather than go back to England? Settle in the colonies. Okay? Well, at this point in his life, he's 78 years old, he opposes Britain's heavy-handed tactics, and he also opposes their military presence in Massachusetts. So he's a little bit disgusted with the British Army. He does not like their heavy-handed tactics and military presence in Massachusetts. Does anybody know what heavy-handed tactics are? So if I get tired of what, if I'm heavy-handed and Hannah says something, well, I'll just go, Hannah would never do that. So Mason, when Mason throws the old Sasquatch comment the other day, if I was heavy-handed, I'd have just come over and whacked him on the side of the head. That's what heavy-handed means. Somebody that just is real harsh in their way of doing things. Well, he thought the Britain's army was heavy-handed, and he did not like the fact there were so many military troops in Massachusetts. Well, keep him in mind, because we're going to come back to him. Well, back in Boston, you remember Dr. Joseph Warren, the doctor that tried to save Christopher Sider, who was shot outside of a residence? Well, he had organized the Massachusetts Militia. He was the one organizing the Massachusetts Militia, and he also implemented a spy network for the colonists to spy on the British. Okay, so they were turning tides. So back in Boston, Dr. Joseph Warren had organized the Massachusetts Militia, and he also implemented a spy network to check on British troop movements. Okay, so Joseph Warren is going to be more than a doctor here, isn't he? He's going to be a patriot, or in the British's eyes, a rebel. So he's the man that organizes the Massachusetts Militia. He's responsible, don't you think, for the stockpiling of some of these weapons and ammunition, right? He's involved in that. He's also implemented a spy network to check on British troop movements. Well, his spies were on the west bank of the Charles River in Massachusetts, and they reacted when they sighted British troops crossing the river. Because remember, these British troops are marching from Boston to where? Lexington, then Concord. Okay? So as they're leaving Boston, and they're starting to cross the Charles River, Patriot spies are sitting in the Old North Church in Boston. And they're paying attention to these troop movements, right? And what are they seeing the troops do? Go across the river towards Lexington and Concord. They see troops moving. And so these spies, they're in the old window, in the window of the Old North Church in Boston. What do they do? From history. They flicker lights, lanterns. They're flickering lanterns in the at the top of the Old North Church. And that means that the redcoats are coming. You've heard this story from elementary. So Patriot spies on the west bank of the Charles River reacted when they sighted British troops crossing the river. They quickly flickered 2 lanterns in the window of the Old North Church in Boston, and this signal of the flickering the 2 lanterns meant that the redcoats were marching to Lexington. Now, you've all heard of Paul Revere's famous ride, correct? Guess who initiated that? Guess who sent Paul Revere and another guy by the name of William Dawes Jr.? Guess who gave him the order to give that famous ride? Joseph, little-known Joseph Warren. Now, if you get a chance on the over the shoulder of JFK there, I found a print of Joseph Warren, and I put him up on the wall, but just so you know. So it's actually Joseph Warren, Dr. Warren, who then sends out Paul Revere and William Dawes Jr. to ride out into the night and spread the news that the redcoats were marching towards Lexington on their way to Concord. So this is what starts Paul Revere's famous ride. So again, it will be Dr. Joseph Warren who will order both Paul Revere and William Dawes Jr. to ride out into the night and give the news of the redcoats marching towards Lexington on their way to Concord. So they leaped on their horses and galloped off into the night, shouting, "The regulars are coming! The regulars are coming!" Why didn't they say the British are coming? The British are coming, which is because they're all British. So they jump on their horses and they ride off and they yell as they go through the towns, "The regulars are coming! The regulars are coming!" They don't say redcoats, they say regulars. And they don't say British according to falsehood, because everybody was British. Now, because they were concerned about getting to Lexington, Revere and Dawes actually went in opposite directions, thinking that if I don't make it, at least maybe you will. Thinking if they went together and they got hung up, they'd both get hung up. So they actually kind of went in opposite directions to a point and circled around to try to make it to Lexington with the idea that maybe one of them could get there without a conflict. Well, in Lexington, before they get there, there's a young doctor by the name of Samuel Prescott who's visiting his fiancée. So before Revere and Dawes get there, in Lexington, there's a young doctor there by the name of Samuel Prescott, and he's there visiting his fiancée. It's on a hot date. So he visits with her, and finally at 1 o'clock in the morning, he decides he's going to bid her goodbye, gives her a goodbye kiss, and leaves at 1 a.m. In the meantime, Revere and Dawes have successfully, both of them, got to Lexington. And they're back together again now, and they've already spread the word in Lexington that the regulars were coming. So as Prescott is riding off from his fiancées, he runs into both Revere and Dawes and decides to join them and help them. He's going to help them spread the news. I don't know how many people know this story. It's a good story. So Samuel Prescott gets off his hot date, gives his girlfriend or fiance a kiss goodbye at 1 a.m., leaves, and happens to just run into Revere and Dawes, who had completed their Lexington message giving, so to speak. So he joins them, and immediately all three gallop into trouble. Because they got to get where now? Concord, okay? So they all three gallop into trouble. Well, Revere is captured by British soldiers, and Dawes and Prescott barely escape. But they got to get to Concord, man. They got to warn these people. So Revere is captured, and Dawes and Prescott barely escape. Well, as Dawes and Prescott continue to Concord, Dawes is thrown from his horse, and he's forced to walk, which leaves the responsibility of getting to Concord to a guy that wasn't even in the picture at the start. And who is that? Samuel Prescott becomes the man that delivers the news to the people of Concord. Not Paul Revere, not William Dawes, but Samuel Prescott, the guy that was on a hot date and rode into history.
So what do we always remember?
That's a good question. That's why that's why this is an AP course, because I want you to remember what's happened. Okay, that takes us to our next subtopic then, which is battles at Lexington and Concord. These will be the first real conflicts between militia, because we don't have an army yet, right? Militia from Massachusetts and the British Army. Okay? Battles at Lexington and Concord.